So let's start. Today's session will be for visualizing BIM or V-Ray into BIM pipeline, into V-Ray and into Revit pipeline, how we can use V-Ray in Revit. So first of all, I'll show some images. I'll start with the idea, with the images, then I'll follow this overview. I'll cover the render engines in V-Ray, materials, how we handle with the materials for the global illumination, the indirect illumination, how we can change the environment, camera, different effects like fog, artificial lights into Revit, denoiser, how we can render less and denoise this after the rendering process is done, color corrections, V-Ray Swarm, the new render management and monitoring system, different camera modes, and pipeline straight from Revit to 3ds Max. So first of all, I'll start with this concept, and this is very important. The designer versus visualization expert. They're two different types of people. So for the designer itself, his primary focus is not to the image itself. It's on the idea, the concept, and the drawing, detailing everything. All these images, they are made in Revit. This too, this interior. And this is, again, the sample project from Revit itself, but made from more artistic part with V-Ray. Of course, this image is created by experts, with 3ds Max, these two. So the idea behind V-Ray in Revit, it's designed for you guys, for the designer itself. So we've interviewed different studios, different people, different architects. So all of them want to be accessible, to be simple, to have a quality in the image, and to be fast. So V-Ray in 3ds Max, as you probably know, the environment is 3ds Max is more complicated. It's great if you're used to use it, if you're a 3D specialist. It's powerful, but it's not so easy for the beginner. This is the V-Ray settings in 3ds Max, and this is V-Ray settings and V-Ray into Revit. So it's very intuitive and simple. Follow the native workflow in Revit from left to right. The most important things are in the left side, the less important things are on the right side, means the settings. And what I'll show you is based on this project. Barcelona Pavilion, Ms. van der Rohe, you know this. So, first of all, select the viewport or the camera you want to render from, resolution, different lighting, and render. You can render with two different types of render engines, production or RT, the interactive rendering mode. And that's all. You have the results without any altering the scene. As I mentioned, V-Ray have two different engines. It's one engine, V-Ray engine, split it into different pipelines or workflows. The first is V-Ray Advanced or Production, rendering with progressive or with buckets, and then V-Ray Interactive, aka V-Ray RT. So, V-Ray Production is perfect for final images. You have different indirect illumination or GI, the global illumination settings. You reach final results faster than with and works perfect with form distributed rendering and monitoring system. On the other hand, you can use different mode or RT when you set scene, when you set the camera, when you set the materials, the light conditions, everything. Supports on CPU or GPU. And the image materials without any altering, V-Ray will render everything. V-Ray supports the Autodesk architectural materials. You can override all these materials with V-Ray materials. You have V-Ray library with more than 500 materials in it. So just drag and drop. And you have material editor. So you can start from scratch material, alter this, save, and use the material. So let's change. This is the material browser. So by default, V-Ray will render everything based on auto-generated materials. Let's change the water surface material. You have options for tiling and rotation. Quick shortcut for the material editor with perfectly generated from type to type materials, from diffuse to metal to glass or to water to jam to everything. V-Ray will automatically set the correct IOR, refractions, etc. And it's clear you can see the difference with the water, with override materials from V-Ray materials. Now, again, this override is based on the idea to keep the data. Everything in V-Ray is in Revit is based on override. Materials, they are override with V-Ray materials. The sun position is we render with V-Ray sun and sky system, but we grab the transform position from the daylight system in Revit. And this, everything is based on the idea to keep the data, the metadata, the information of your model itself. So you keep the data in your project. Just for the image, you can override everything. You can override material by material or global overrides the material based on opaque or transparent type. For more conceptual, not to, on the conceptual phase, not to focus on the design, the idea, and concept. You can produce something, images like a model. It's very easy just from the material browser. Global override based on opaque or transparent materials. You can use just a color with some parameters for reflections, glossiness, transparency. Or you can override not with a color, but with V-Ray material from the left. And just render. very easy, very intuitive, and powerful tool. Again, not to focus on the materials, but focus on the idea, on the concept itself. For the environment lighting, you can use the daylight system in Revit with V-Ray Sun and Sky system, or you can use one light source called dome light. It's a hemisphere or full sphere light. You can feed it with a 360-degree image and light you're seeing. For example, you can control the sun position from the settings, or you can control it manually when you set to see the daylight system in the viewport. Different light conditions from different time. These are the settings for the sun. Sunsets control the sharpness of shadows. So when I have a large emitter, light emitter, you have smooth light source. When the emitter, the light source is small, you have shadows. You can override this environment lighting from sun and sky dome light with color, or you can use 360-degree image and split your scene with this, and control the rotation of the image. Okay, the next thing is for the camera. The camera is the same physical camera in V-Ray. You can control the exposure value, the white balance, different effects like depth of field or vignetting effect. From here, the exposure values in the photography is based on ISO, f number, and shutter speed. To be easy and accessible, of course, we use only the exposure value as a parameter and slider. For example, you have different effects like the focus or depth of field, and you can control the amount of this effect and the focus point as a distance. Optical vignetting effect as these dark edges. It's in the photography, in the real world, it's produced by the fact that the light came from a circular lens and it's projected on rectangular film or sensor. You have different camera modes for the camera itself. By default, it's standard camera. So you have strict field of view as like you shoot with your photo camera, but you can easily override this from the drop-down menu from standard to stereoscopic camera per eye, or to convert to grab 360-degree image for VR experience based on cubic camera mapping. Only with one click you can grab 360-degree of your project. This is example how it look like this image. Now, we support different effects for a fog, aerial perspective, and environment fog. Settings, fog, aerial perspective. In the real world, we have this the air is clear, so in our world, the oceans that are far away look more desaturated when they are far away from the camera.
Yeah, very.
Aerial perspective, yeah?
You're breaking up. Is there
Well,
anything, can you get closer to your microphone?
just a moment. Can you repeat?
That's perfect. You were breaking up a little bit,
Uh-huh.
so it's better now.
Okay. So in the real world, you have this dust in the air. So we can use aero perspective or environment fog to simulate this effect. The artificial lights in Revit, they are based on IS file light profile. So V-Ray supports these IES files. It's very easy step. So let's render from this view. Turn the artificial lights on, and what you have is this image. Here the problem is that we have sun intensity by default. So when we tweak the sun intensity to decrease the intensity and correct the exposure value, we can see the artificial lights. V-Ray will render whatever you have in the scene. So for the final render, you can use V-Ray production with, for example, the denoiser. This, the denoiser will increase the speed when you render. You can render with less quality, with lower quality, and denoise the image after the process. You can set different color correction without enter third-party plugins entirely in V-Ray Frame Buffer. The V-Ray Frame Buffer is this window where you can see the render itself. So it's very easy. Just enable the denoiser from the render channel and start rendering the image. If you want to be very specific with exposure or white balance, some color correction, you can do this entirely in Revit. The denoiser needs some information, so when the denoiser grabs enough information, V-Ray will automatically switch from RGB, from the beauty path, to effect result from the denoised image. So you keep both of them, the original and the RGB path and the denoised path. Now, how to use V-Ray Swarm? As I mentioned, V-Ray Swarm is the new distributed rendering and monitoring system with V-Ray. It's shipped with V-Ray. You just have to enable it. Why we want to use Swarm? To leverage our resources. For example, if you have hardware resources dedicated for this purpose, like a render farm, you can use V-Ray Swarm. Or if you don't have this resource, you can grab the existing resource in your office. For example, in the nighttime when nobody is in the office, you can grab the machine power, the hardware based on CPU or GPU, doesn't matter, and to put this power to render your image. You can set different, you have freedom of based on tags or slider to use all this power. Now, we have enabled the DR with the slider as a percentage of the resources. Just choose whatever you want. And this is very easy and very powerful because you don't have to wait to render the image from your machine only. Just grab whatever all the resources you have. And the pipeline to 3ds Max. There's two different workflows. The first workflow is to use the native Autodesk pipeline to connect Revit to 3ds Max. The problem is that when you export and import automatically from Revit to Max, you have to reassign every single materials again. So if you're sure that you don't need to alter the scene, the materials, the geometry itself, you just can use V-Ray scene file format. Just set the quality from the render, export V-Ray scene, and import it in 3ds Max, and it will look exactly the same. The V-Ray scene have the information for materials, lights, cameras, everything. It's encapsulated file. So all this you have information on our official help site, docs.chaosgroup.com. We have a YouTube channel, Chaos Group TV, with quick start tutorials. We have Chaos Group Labs with different articles if you are interested in V-Ray Swarm. And you can join the V-Ray community. So now I'll switch to Revit environment to show you V-Ray itself in action. So as I mentioned, this is the toolbar with perspective views. So all these cameras, they're exactly the same from the 3D views. The next section, the render with V-Ray RT or export V-Ray C. You have show or hide the V-Ray frame buffer, the window where you can see the rendered image. You have project gallery. This project gallery is per camera, so it's very easy to save to your hard drive the image or just to save to the project, then drag and drop in the sheet and use the image. Quality presets, everything here is preset based. Resolution based again on preset, or you can set your custom resolution. Artificial lights on and off, different light condition, V-Ray sun, dome light, or nothing. Material browser, this is a browser with every materials in your project or from current view. This material browser is all these materials, they're exactly the same as the materials in Revit. The global override based on opaque or transparent materials. The camera settings from standard with fixed field of view, just override to grab 360-degree image, exposure value, white balance, different effects. And the settings. General, the material path, export different channels for render elements, the denoiser is here. What I want to show here is the sharing section. So if I render straight without any alter the scene, you see something like this. So by default, we have all these materials and they're auto-generated. So we have this ability in V-Ray to set, to create different sets or to load different settings for materials, environment, camera, swarm. So it's pretty easy to me just to use simple XML file, load it I can check, uncheck materials, cameras, environment, import these settings. And what you'll see is automatically Vero will set different materials for you. Or even better, for example, this is the summer set with some materials, texture. I can simply override this with loading different set for the winter. And now, when I render, you see different light condition, not with sun and sky, but with dome. Different materials, different everything, based only on this set, simple XML file. This window is called the VFB, Vary Frame Buffer. So here again, you can use the Vary Frame Buffer history. You can observe different cameras, different materials, different everything from here. You have color corrections on the right side, exposure, highlight burn, different light balance, hue saturation, color balance, levels, different background. And you can use the lens parameters from here to set different lens effects based on bloom or glare. Based on user of ours, you can release and acquire a license. So if you have, if you want to use Vray on in your studio, you can acquire a license or release to be used from another colleague of yours. Yeah, we have some error here. So basically, this is the most important things. So I think it's time for a Q&A session. Okay.
Hey, we have two questions here. One is, what is export VR scene?
The VR scene is capsulated file format. It can be written from any other render, but you have capsulated information for geometry, lights, materials, cameras, and everything is in one file. So what we want to provide with this is interoperability, cross-platform, cross-project, because in the in production pipeline, when you don't use only one software, but you share different assets, for example, with Vray, you can share different materials because they're universal materials, Vray material. You can use them in 3ds Max, in Maya, in Modo, Blender, Rhino, SketchUp, Revit, they're all the same. You can use and share geometry with these materials and lights using VRC file format.
Okay, we got a couple extra questions that come in. Do the seasonal presets come with the standard install?
Beg pardon?
The seasonal, like the different seasons, does that come with the install, or do you have to?
No, they are not shipped with different. They are not shipped with V-Ray. Just when you, for example, I can show different project. When you create a project, for example, here in the material browser, I just have some materials in this project, and I overwrite them with V-Ray material. So all these materials, they are from the library. The library is shipped with V-Ray. For example, the library, in fact, is in C program file skills group, V-Ray for Revit, materials. So you have material libraries with a lot of materials embedded. And for example, concrete. The cool thing here is that you have thumbnails, retraced thumbnails with V-Ray. So you can use this library. You can, for example, this is asphalt, but I can easily override this from the Windows Explorer. Just drag and drop this material, open it, alter this material with a standalone tool. Just I can change the bitmap or change the reflection, refraction, everything, and use it. So the idea here with the set is when I override some materials, to save this set of materials, to save the light condition, everything, I just go here in the settings, sharing, and export all my settings as a file. For example, here I want to show something. So here I have different sets with from different position, different materials. I can override. I don't want to save here. I want just to open some set. When I save, when I export my setting and then load them, they will be exactly the same. So this is the way you can save different sets with environment condition and lighting.
Okay, perfect. Quick question is, do the HDRI files come with V-Ray?
Yeah, here with the dome light, you have here in C program files, V-Ray for Revit, you have one HDR shipped with V-Ray for Revit. If you want to use something else, another file, just you can download. There's a lot of free HDRs, or for example, the most important thing is that with your photo camera, you can go to the ground zero of your project, shot a couple of images with a photo camera, then using a free software, there's a lot of software for stitching all these images. You can create your own HDR, 360-degree image, and use it.
Cool. All right, we got a couple more questions. Can you create a rendered video with a specific camera path?
We're working on this. For now, we don't support animation in Revit.
Okay, we've got a question regarding this one gentleman uses a 4K monitor and some of the menus don't show up. They're just blank. Do you have any recommendations on why that is?
This will be fixed. Yeah, this is a issue with the 4K screens. This will be fixed with the service pack.
Okay.
For example, the latest service pack here is 3.5. Next month, I believe we'll launch the next service pack 3.6.
Okay. Last question we have is there a way to use Dynamo or something else to batch change materials? If he has...
Yeah, you can use Dynamo.
Okay.
In fact, I can show here just a moment. No. Bear with me. Revit. So let's open new project. And if you run Dynamo and load the Dynamo, you will see Vira will support Dynamo. Revit. Okay.
While he's working on that, if you guys have any more questions, feel free to put them in the question queue.
You see the Dynamo.
Cool.
So yeah, Vira supports Dynamo.
Very nice. All right. I don't see any more other questions coming in. Oh, got a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
Does each render farm station require its own separate license if we have in Swarm? I'm going to...
Yeah, in fact, I can show you if you're interested in Swarm. So, talking about Swarm, what is Swarm? Swarm is distributed rendering system. When you have V-Ray for Revit, in fact, you have one license for the interface, the graphic interface, and one render node. If you want to use Swarm, you just have to buy only the render node because you don't need anything else. In fact, it's designed primarily for Revit. You have Swarm in Revit, SketchUp, and Rhino. It's very powerful. And what you need to have Revit on your workstation on the master computer, Revit and V-Ray. And then for the slave machine, for the other machines, for the hardware resources, you need to have only Swarm installed. You don't need to have Revit. And
Cool.
then, for example, this is an example. You can set different tags and percentage, so you can control and manage the resources based on tags and slider. So really, this can speed up in big time your process, the rendering process. So the tags, I can show you this in here in settings. So you can enable or disable from rendering, enable swarm. You can enable and from settings. With this shortcut, you have access to all the machines that have swarm installed. Now, based on tag, for example, 3D, so now I can set different machine with different tags. So some of my, if I have different teams in my studio, I can put some machines from Studio A for Studio B for Studio C, and they know that they have dedicated render farm or just to use all the machines. From here, I can enable, disable, enter different machines. I can observe everything from here. You see the CPU utilization, GPU, memory, networking per machine. You have different versions of V-Ray. For example, if in your studio, if there are teams with different versions of V-Ray, Swarm will automatically install and store this different version and will use exact the same version from the master machine.